In finals, your partner might get a point while you go home with absolutely nothing. Why is that? Well, you're about to find out. It should hopefully make sense that the more people competing in a competition, the harder it is going to be to place at the top. That is the entire principle behind why the WSDC has a tier system, both so that we understand how many rounds we need to do to get to that top amount of competitors competing for points, and also, once you place, win, or just are in the final of that competition, how many points are awarded is at least somewhat based on how many people you've beaten in order to get there. All right, today we're talking about the WSDC tier system. Let's dig in, and we're gonna start with, hopefully somewhere over here, a little table that the WSDC gives us. Tier 1 makes up competitions that have 5 to 10 competitors competing. It's the smallest division that the WSDC allows points for, and it's most commonly seen at the upper divisions, think like All-Star, Champions, occasionally Advanced, mostly at smaller competitions. First place is given 3 points, second place is given 2, and third place gets 1 point. And believe it or not, you can run a prelim in a tier 1 competition. Very rare. The only reason you would do that is if you have such an imbalanced number of leaders and followers that you're trying to get it down. So let's say you had 5 leaders and 10 followers. Well, that's double the number of followers. You might run a prelim for the followers to try to cut to 5. Only the top 3 are getting points anyways. It may work out like that, and it'll make it a lot easier to judge if not every leader has to dance with 2 followers. In tier 2, you're looking at 11 to 19 competitors, and the top 5 placements now are going to get points. What's kind of curious, at least to me, is that going from tier 1 to tier 2, first place and second place double their points, but then third triples their points and it goes 2 to 1. And you'll sort of see this throughout the tier system. The WSDC doesn't have an exact hard and fast way of leveling up the number of points that you get. It's a little quirky as far as when more points are added and at what amounts. Generally speaking though, you're going to see a consistent increase of around 5 points per first place as you go up the divisions. Just doesn't always exactly work out to be that. The other interesting thing about tier 2 is that you don't have to run a prelim to run a tier 2 competition. Now, most of the time you probably will see one, just kind of depends on where the numbers end up. If you're in the lower part of that range, 11, 12, maybe 13, you may see straight to finals, especially if the numbers are evenly matched or fairly evenly matched. If you get above that, or if the numbers are more mismatched, again, like before, you're most likely to see a prelim that's going to cut at least a few, hopefully on both sides, if not at least on one side, whichever one is larger. We move up to tier 3. To me, tier 3 is where things start to get a little bit interesting in terms of how the rounds work and where we end up. We have 10 for first, 8 for second, 6 for third, 4 for fourth, and 2 for fifth. But crucially, now we add an additional 1 point for 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. So all the way up to 10th place, we're going to give people a single point, basically just from making the final. And that should tell you that at tier 3, we no longer have an option to not have a prelim. In fact, you have to do a prelim cutting into a final. Most of the time, you're going to see a prelim that cuts to around 10, since there are 10 points to be given out, although it can vary a little bit from comp to comp. Now, towards the end of this, as we're getting up to that 39 number, you may start to see a semifinal added in between. So you run a prelim with everyone, you come to a semifinal, and then you cut to that final. Now, it's not required, and most events will skip on it if they can, mostly because competitions take a lot of time, and if you're trying to put in a semifinal in between something that could just have 2 rounds, you probably would rather just have the 2 rounds and be done with it. One other thing that's useful to note here, technically, if we go into tier 4, we're required to have a semifinal. Occasionally, a tier 3 competition that's right at the cusp will have a couple competitors register for it last minute. You will still get points for the higher division, but if it's within 10%, generally the WSDC does not penalize a competition. If a couple people add last second, it pumps them into the next tier, but they don't end up running a prelim. So just so you know, if you see a competition that has 40 competitors and they only run a prelim into a final, it's not illegal, it probably just is within that 10% margin. And this is because people can typically register up until like an hour before the competition, but our judging schedules get made weeks in advance. All right, tier number 4. This is where things start to get interesting and the point totals start to get pretty sizable. This is from 40 competitors all the way up to 79 competitors. And our first place is now worth 15 points. I'll let you read on the screen what each of these are worth, but do note that now we have points all the way out to 12th, not just 10th. And that means typically you're going to see a final of at least 12 anytime you have a tier 4 competition. Also, now we're required to do a prelim, a semi, and a final. And it's optional to add a quarterfinal if needed, although again, very rarely are you going to see a quarter added if it's not pretty much necessitated by the number of competitors. The most common case for this being if it's really far up close to that 80 number, potentially, but most of the time you're still going to see prelim, semi, final here. Moving on to tier 5. Tier 5 is that 80 to 129 group. This is where a lot of our novice competitions, depending on the size of your event, tend to fall into. Now that first place is worth 20 points. One and done in novice, pretty exciting. From here, just know that quarterfinals are not required, but they are recommended. And a lot of the time, if you're above 80 competitors, you're going to see a prelim to a quarter, quarter to a semi, semi to a final. And then we run up into tier 6, yes? And tier 6 is truly massive. 130 plus competitors. There are only a few competitions on this planet that regularly get a comp to that tier 6 level. First place is getting 25 points. You have 2 points if you get 6th all the way out to 15th place now. And by the way, this was true of tier 5 as well. You get 2 points all the way out to that 15th. So lots of points on the table. Technically, the WSDC doesn't require you to have a quarterfinal for tier 6. I can't really imagine a world where you're not going to have a quarterfinal for tier 6. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning. It's entirely possible for you and your partner to get different amounts of points, even though you draw each other in a final and place the exact same. As mentioned, this is because different tiers apply if there are different numbers of competitors on one side versus the other. So let's say there are, in all-star prelims, you have 19 leaders and you have 21 followers. Well, that means that followers are going to get a point all the way out to 10th place in the final, whereas leaders are only going to get points for the top 5. You might get 6th, you get nothing, and your partner gets a point. Totally possible just because of the amount of people in your division and how that affects which tier you end up in. Now, the only other thing strategy-wise I would say that tiers can be useful for, if you're trying to, say, speed run your competitive career and get out of particular divisions as quickly as possible, you might start to think about which competitions typically have high tier divisions that you want to compete in, because if you can regularly do well and place highly, you can get out of divisions more quickly the bigger that they are. Not that point chasing is the most important thing in the world. It doesn't necessarily track onto being a great dancer. There are many more important things than just having WSDC points. That said, Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed, and there's a lot of people out there who are interested in getting as many WSDC points as possible. All right, well, awesome talking with you. Thanks for listening. I'm glad I'm able to share a little bit of the fun world of West Coast Swing and explain some of why things work. If you have a particular thing you'd love to hear about, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. Joel out.